When we do know how many times we want to repeat a piece of code, that's called definite iteration. Python handles definite iteration with for loops. So when should you use a for loop instead of a while loop? A search and rescue robot might have a list of locations to deliver supplies to and a block of code that tells it how to navigate to a new place and drop the supplies off. In that case, we would want to loop through each of the locations in the list to run navigation and drop off with the code. Or if you're building an app that helps people find used cars, you could have a list of dealerships in the user's area and then run an algorithm to find cars that match their search criteria for each of the dealerships. Let's look at a few ways that we can use for loops in Python. If we wanted to print our list of sushi ingredients, we could index into the list and print each element individually. But this would be so many lines of code for large lists. We can replace all of these lines of code with a for loop. This loop says, for each of the elements in the ingredients list, do the block of code indented below. Print out the ingredients. Here's another example. We could print out a list of high scores in a game using a for loop. The word element in this for loop represents the loop variable and can be whatever name you want. So it makes sense to give it a name that describes what kind of element from the list that it will represent. In this case, it will be representing a number, so we could call it num. Now, num takes the value of the next item in the list for each time that the loop iterates. It starts with 90, then goes to 88, 75, then 50, and then when there are no items left in the list, the Python interpreter jumps out of the for loop to the next piece of code. What if we wanted to print the numbers 1 to 100? Creating a list of all the numbers in order would be really tedious. So to help us make for loops that use a sequence of numbers, Python has yet another super useful built-in function called range. Range will either give us a list of numbers starting from 0 and stopping at the number that you provide, or if you give it 2 parameters, it will give you a list starting from the first number and stopping before the second number. This for loop uses range to print the numbers from 0 to 99. You can also use range to iterate a certain number of times. This for loop prints Python is the best 3 times. There's one last way that we can use for loops in Python, and that's by combining list indexing and the range function. We can index into lists in Python using the square bracket syntax that we already learned. In this example, we're using range and the length of the list of colors to loop through each color by its index. This for loop technique is especially useful when we make more complicated for loops that might index through different lists at the same time, in different ways, or skipping certain elements. Go ahead and try out these 3 different methods for writing for loops.